Hey, it's Mike here, and today we're quickly going to look at some new beverage guidelines for infants and toddlers, which were quite shocking and suspicious. In short, it was to avoid plant milks, actively avoid plant milks, as well as how 1-year-olds should be drinking up to 3 cups a day of whole cow's milk. So we're going to crack the mystery of where these guidelines are really coming from, which is quite, astounding and systematic, as well as why they are coming out now. I did some serious detective work for you guys on this, so let's go. Actually, I don't need glasses. Okay, these guidelines, to be clear, are not coming from the government. They're actually coming from a particular organization that you've probably never heard of. It's called Healthy Drinks, Healthy Kids. They say they reached these guidelines based off consensus from major organizations, some you've probably heard of, like the American Heart Association and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Yes, the same one that has a position on vegan diets, but also the American Academy of Pediatrics. So we're going to unpack those in a bit. But this, of course, led to a media spree scaring parents away from plant milk. All right, now for the first shocking recommendation that they make, that 1-year-olds should be consuming up to 3 cups of whole milk or full-fat milk per day, essentially saying that these children are 50% baby cow, because that's 450 calories, nearly 50% of their calorie requirements at 1-year-old. It's also 13.7 grams of saturated fat per day. Now, wait a second. If you know your stuff, you know that human breast milk is actually about the same in terms of saturated fat content, but I'm a bit concerned here because it's a different saturated fat profile. One type of saturated fat, myristic, is more associated with higher cholesterol than others, and cow's milk, that can be up to 14%, while human breast milk averages around 8%. Something to think about. Either way, training these children to want full-fat milk as well as the other dairy products that are constantly shoved on them, in addition to the rest of the U.S. diet, is why, from this study, virtually all children in the U.S. have fatty streaks on their aorta, the beginnings of heart disease, by age 3. And why, from this study, we see spinal disc degeneration, likely from clogged back arteries, at age 11 now. And I think they know it too. I got a kick out of this. They say that if there's a family history of obesity or heart disease, reduced fat, 2% or 1% milk, may be considered in place of whole milk. And as the age recommendations go up, it also shifts down to lower fat until it's 2.5 cups a day of skim milk at age 4 to 5, kind of admitting that saturated fat from dairy is not healthy. 2.5 cups a day is actually a lot of lactose, and I know that Dr. Milton Mills would be mad from this particular page because they're using a black girl as the face of 2.5 cups of dairy a day when there's a 75% chance that she's lactose intolerant.
I actually came here this morning to call out the racism that is inherent in the U.S. dietary guidelines. The vast majority of people of color in this country are intolerant of the lactose that's in milk. Yet, because they think they have to eat this stuff, they go out, eat it, get sick, and think that they have some sort of intestinal problem. So I want to encourage you, get the racism out, get the dairy out. Please do your job. Thank you.
We'll touch more on lactose intolerance in a second, but there are other major health concerns here besides just the fat. We're talking about the hormone content as well. It's a cocktail of mammalian hormones. We know from this study that much less than 2.5 or 3 cups can lower testosterone and raise certain types of estrogen by about 20% each. Statistically significant finding. So what does that do to the hormonal development of children? Probably not anything good. We also know that milk contains insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1, and it also raises IGF-1, which can promote cancer in excess levels. So it's no surprise that this study found that those who drank milk in adolescence had a 300% risk of prostate cancer later down the line. We also know that these dairy proteins can be linked to certain autoimmune diseases. The most pertinent here is type 1 diabetes, sometimes called childhood onset diabetes. Connection in the epidemiology is well established. We also know the mechanism. And a study like this one is pretty much the nail in the coffin. They were able to give mice type 1 diabetes by early life exposure to cow's milk. Squeak, squeaker, squeakin'. Translation: ouch, you gave me diabetes, cow's milk. And guess what doesn't destroy your pancreas for life? Plant milk. We'll get there in a second. But first, it's kind of suspicious how we're really pushing that 3 servings of milk per day, or enough servings to easily add some cheese and get to 3 servings, which is where we need to get onto the special interests. Let's go through these organizations one by one, starting with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Here is a quote from a little bit ago. Since 2003, the National Dairy Council and the Academy, along with other leading healthcare organizations, have teamed up to educate the public about the recommended 3 daily servings of dairy and the nutrition and health benefits of dairy foods. Okay, we also have the American Academy of Pediatrics, which in previous years, according to this article on why they seem to be suspiciously against plant milk compared to other pediatricians, well, it turns out that they've taken up to $250,000 in a single year from the National Dairy Council. That's insane. Before we get to the third organization, I want to mention something that I think is really cool and I just recently found out about, and that is milkguys.com, which is a new all-vegan online grocery store. They have a growing selection of foods. They probably have that fancy vegan product that you want to try, and then they also have simpler things like corn tortillas and McDougal soups. You can also, get this, use an oil-free search filter when looking through their products, which is awesome if you know me. They also have a major eco mission, which is required in my book. And so if you want to get $10 off your first order, you can use my link below. It will also support this channel. So thank you very much. All right, let's keep going. And now we have the American Heart Association, which brings me to how there's actually already been 12,000 physicians under the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine that have come together and say, these recommendations seem whack. And as they mention, quote, the American Heart Association regularly receives annual payments from the National Dairy Council for memberships in the American Heart Association's Industry Nutrition Forum. And here's their website saying, yes, the National Dairy Council is in fact on there. So 3 of these consensus organizations are directly funded by the National Dairy Council. This is actually just the opinion of the National Dairy Council. All right, we'll talk about that more in a second. But first, let's get to their second crazy recommendation, which is just to avoid plant milks. For all of the ages here, no plant milks. This is where the industry influence is really obvious because plant milks are cutting notoriously into the profits of cow's milk, but they're telling you to avoid it, like there's something seriously wrong in it. Other drinks that are supposed to be avoided have things like caffeine or high levels of refined sugar. No, there's no ingredient in particular they mentioned should be avoided. I mean, they don't tell you to avoid water, and they don't tell you to avoid plants, so what's wrong with plant water, aka plant milks? Let's read, quote, plant-based / non-dairy milks are not recommended as a full replacement for regular milk. Evidence indicates that with the exception of fortified soy milk, many plant-based / dairy milk alternatives lack key nutrients found in cow's milk. What I read was sort of the fine print further down. What people are really going to look at are the main recommendations. And first of all, if they're saying that soy milk, fortified soy milk is okay here, why don't they say for all recommendations of milk, fortified soy milk is okay? They don't. Secondly, avoid does not equate to not recommended as a replacement. Those are very different things. Yes, obviously, don't rely solely on plant milk for nutrition for children. That is clear, but there's something more going on. Let's keep reading. Even when these milks have extra nutrients added to them, our bodies may not absorb those nutrients as well as they can from regular milk, which they mean cow's milk. This is actually legitimately pseudoscientific. When you add these extra nutrients on top, they are highly absorbable. And it's funny how they add vitamin D to all cow's milk in the United States. That's totally absorbable, but the same vitamin D they add to plant milk, no, sorry, not absorbable. It's literally made up, and one piece of sense here that somebody in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics probably fought hard for, quote, unsweetened and fortified non-dairy milks may be a good choice if a child is allergic to dairy, lactose intolerant, or is in a family that does not eat dairy products. Funny that statement wasn't in the main section. It's, again, down in sort of the fine print area, but it's funny how they're talking about 65% of the population of the world that is lactose intolerant. This recommendation does not apply to them. Again, they push milk saying, make sure that you have these nutrients found in milk such as protein, calcium, and vitamin D, essential to human growth and development. Yes, all these nutrients can be gotten either through the sun or supplementation, in both cases, cow's milk or plant-based milk, or other plant foods for calcium and protein. But I will say something that bothers me here, and that's just the plant milk industry being stingy, is that they water down things like almond milk so much that to get to the same amount of calories in 1 cup of whole milk, you'd have to drink 4 cups, over 4 cups of almond milk, which is why all those artisanal almond milks are so delicious. They also keep trying to push this dairy calcium thing when the largest studies on the topic show that excess calcium has no benefit for bone health. Really, that dietary calcium isn't even associated. And then we have to think of the billions of Asians that are lactose intolerant that don't appear to have any bone issues. Now let's zoom out and put this all into context as to why I believe that this is happening now, and that's because the US dietary guidelines are being formed right now. They've had that public opinion portion close, and now they're just deciding. And so what better than having a neutral organization come out with strong recommendations against things like plant milk and strong recommendations for cow's milk. If you've seen my dietary guidelines video, you know that these industries were there trying to push their message, but what better way to keep influencing it than hide behind 2 layers of organizations with a neutral recommendation? Come on. In the end, these recommendations are largely a joke. They are not logical, they are pseudoscientific in many cases, and even put children at risk of health issues such as, basic reactions for lactose intolerance up to, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune reactions, and all of those hormones messing things up and potentially fueling cancer down the line. And that recommendation to avoid plant milk is just suspiciously right in line with the dairy industry's agenda. And we have at least 3 out of 4 of the consensus organizations, heck, possibly 4 out of 4. I didn't even look into the dentist organization. They are funded by the National Dairy Council. This is the National Dairy Council's recommendations. All right, quick reminder, my Milk Guys link is in the description right there. And let me know down below, what do you think about this? Do you think that these guidelines are actually going to trick people into feeding their children more milk and avoiding plant milks? Let me know. As usual, feel free to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified about these videos, which a lot of people tell me they don't. And thanks for watching.